I am Malala. Chapter 1. A daughter is born. When I was born, people in our village commiserated with my mother and nobody congratulated my father. I arrived at dawn as the last star blinked out. We Pashtuns see this as an auspicious sign. My father didn't have any money for the hospital or for a midwife, so a neighbor helped at my birth. My parents' first child was stillborn, but I popped out kicking and screaming. I was a girl in a land where rifles are fired in celebration of a son, while daughters are hidden away behind a curtain. Their role in life simply to prepare food and give birth to children. For most Pashtuns, it's gloomy day when a daughter is born. My father's cousin, Jehan Sher Khan Yusufzai, was one of the few who came to celebrate my birth and even gave a handsome gift of money. Yet he brought with him a vast family tree of our clan, the Dalo Khair Yousafzai, going right back to my great great grandfather and showing only the main line. My father, Ziauddin, is different from most Pashtun men. He took the tree, drew a line like a lollipop from his name, and at the end of it he wrote Malala. His cousin laughed in astonishment. My father didn't care. He says he looked into my eyes after I was born and felt the love. He told people, I know there's something different about this child. He even asked friends to throw dried fruits, sweets, and coin into my cradle, something we usually only do for boys. I was named after Malalai of Maiwand, the greatest heroine of Afghanistan. Pashtuns are proud people of many tribes, split between Pakistan and Afghanistan. We live as we for centuries by a code called Pashtunwali, which obliges us to give hospitality to all guests and in which the most important value is Nang or honor. The first thing that can happen to a Pashtun is loss of face. Shame is very terrible thing for Pashtun men. We have a saying, without honor, the world counts for nothing. We fight and fear among ourselves so much that our word for cousin Tharbar is the same as our word for enemy. But we always come together against outsiders who try to conquer our lands. All Pashtun children grow up with the story of how Malalai inspired the Afghan army to defeat the British in 1880 in one of the biggest battles of Second Anglo-Afghan War. Malalai was a daughter of a shepherd in Maiwand, a small town on the dusty plains west of Kandahar. When she was a teenager, both her father and the man she was supposed to marry were among thousands of Afghans fighting against the British occupation of their country. Malalai went to the battlefield with other women from the village to tend the wounded and take them water. She saw their men were losing, and when the flag bearer fell, she lifted her white veil up high and marched into the battlefield in front of the troops. Young love, she shouted, if you do not fall in the battle of Maiwand, then by God someone is saving you as a symbol of shame. Malalai was killed under fire, but her words and bravery inspired the men to turn the battle around. They destroyed an entire brigade, one of the worst defeats in the history of British Army. The Afghans were so proud that the last Afghan king built a Maiwand victory monument in the center of Kabul. In high school, I read some Sherlock Holmes and laughed to see that this was the same battle where Dr. Watson was wounded before becoming partner to the great detective. In Malalai, we Pashtuns have very own Joan of Arc. Many girls' schools in Afghanistan are named after her. But my grandfather, who was a religious scholar and a village cleric, didn't like my father giving me that name. It's a sad name, he said. It means grief stricken. When I was a baby, my father used to sing me a song written by a famous poet, Rehmat Shah Sayal of Peshawar. The last verse ends, O Malalai of my want, rise once more to make patrons understand the song of honor. Your poetic words turn worlds around. I beg you, rise again. My father told the story of Malalai to anyone who came to our house. I loved hearing the story and the songs my father sang to me, and the way my name floated on the wind when people called it. We lived in the most beautiful place in all world. My valley, the Swat Valley, is a heavenly kingdom of mountains, gushing waterfalls, and crystal clear lakes. Welcome to paradise, it says on a sign as you enter the valley. In olden times, Swat was called Udayana, which means garden. We have fields of wildflowers, orchards of delicious fruits, emerald mines, and rivers full of trout. People often call Swat the Switzerland of the East. We even had Pakistan's first ski resort. The rich people of Pakistan came on holidays to enjoy our clean air and scenery and our Sufi festivals of music and dancings. And so did many foreigners, all of whom we called Angrejin, English, wherever they come from. Even the Queen of England came and stayed in White Palace that was built from the same marble as a Taj Mahal by our king, the first Wali or ruler of Swat. We have a special history too. Today, Swat is part of a province of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa or KPK as many Pakistani called it, but Swat used to separate from rest of the Pakistan. We were once again a princely state, one of three with the neighboring lands of Chitral and Dir. In colonial times, our kings owed allegiance to British but ruled their own land. When the British gave India independence in 1947 and divided it, we went with the newly created Pakistan but stayed autonomous. We used the Pakistani rupee, but the government of Pakistan could only intervene on foreign policy. The Wali administered justice, kept the peace between warring tribes, and collected ashur, a tax of 10% of income, with which he built roads, hospitals, and schools. We were only 100 miles from Pakistan's capital, Islamabad, as the crow flies, but it felt as if it were in another country. The journey took at least 5 hours by road over the Malakan Pass, a vast bowl of mountains where long ago our ancestors, led by a preacher called Mullah Saidullah, known by the British as a mad fakir, battled British forces among the craggy peaks. Among them, as Winston Churchill, who wrote a book about it, and we still call on one of the peaks Churchill's Picket, even though he was not very complimentary about our people. At the end of the pass is a green domed shrine where people throw coins to give thanks for their safe arrival. No one I knew had been to Islamabad. Before the troubles came, most people, like my mother, had never been outside Swat. We lived in Mingora, the biggest town in the valley, in fact, the only city. It used to be a small place, but many people had moved in from surrounding villages, making it dirty and crowded. It has hotels, colleges, a nearby golf course, and a famous bazaar for buying our traditional embroidery, gemstones, and anything you can think of. The Madagazar stream loops through it, milky brown from the plastic bags and rubbish thrown into it. It is not clear like the streams in the hilly areas or like the white river Swat just outside town, where people fish for trout and which we visited on holidays. Our house was in Gulkada, which means place of flowers, but it used to be called Batkara, a place of Buddhist statues. Near our homes was a field scattered with mysterious ruins, statues of lions on their haunches, broken columns, headless figures, and oddest of all, hundreds of stone umbrellas. Islam came to our valley in the 11th century when Sultan Mahmud of Ghazni invaded from Afghanistan and became our ruler, but in ancient times, Swat was a Buddhist kingdom. The Buddhists have had a right in the 2nd century and their kings ruled the valley for more than 500 years. Chinese explorers wrote stories of how there were 1,400 Buddhist monasteries along the bank of River Swat, and the magical sound of temple bells would ring out across the valley. The temples are long gone, but almost anywhere you go in Swat, amid all the primroses and other wildflowers, you find their remains. We would often picnic among rock carvings of a smiling fat Buddha sitting cross-legged on a lotus flower. There are many stories that Lord Buddha himself came here because it is a place of such peace, and some of his ashes are said to be buried in the valley in a giant stupa. Our Batkara ruins were a magical place to play hide and seek. Once some foreigners archaeologists arrived to do some work there and told us that in times gone by it was a place of pilgrimage full of beautiful temples domed with gold where Buddhist kings lay buried. My father wrote a poem, The Relics of Batkara, which summed up perfectly how temple and mosque could exist side by side. When the voice of truth rises from the minarets, the Buddha smiles and the broken chain of history reconnects. We lived in the shadow of the Hindu Kush mountains where the men went to shoot ibex and golden cockerels. Our house was one story and proper concrete. On the left were set steps up to a flat roof big enough for us children to play cricket on. It was our playground. At dusk, my father and his friends often gathered to sit and drink tea there. Sometimes I sat on the roof too, watching the smoke rise from the cooking fires all around and listening to the nightly racket of the crickets. Our valley is full of fruit trees on which grow the sweetest figs and pomegranates and peaches, and in our garden we had grapes, guavas, and persimmons. There was a plum tree in our front yard which gave the most delicious fruit. It was always a race between us and the birds to get to them. The birds loved that tree, even the woodpeckers. For as long as I can remember, my mother had talked to birds. At the back of the house was a veranda where the women gathered. We knew what it was like to be hungry, so my mother always cooked extra and gave food to poor families. If there was any left, she fed it to the birds. In Pashto, we loved to sing tape, two-line poems, and she scattered the rice. She would sing once. Don't kill doves in the garden, you kill one another won't come. I like to sit on the roof and watch the mountains and dream. The highest mountain of all is the pyramid-shaped Mount Elum. To us, it's a sacred mountain and so high that it always wears a necklace of fleecy clouds. Even in summer, it's frosted with snow. At school, we learned that in 327 BC, even before the Buddhists came to Swat, Alexander the Great swept into the valley with thousands of elephants and soldiers on his way from Afghanistan to the Indus. The Swati people fled up the mountains believing they would be protected by their gods because it was so high. But Alexander was a determined and patient leader. He built a wooden ram from which he catapults and arrows could reach the top of the mountain. Then he climbed up so he could catch hold of Star of Jupiter as a symbol of his power. From the rooftop, I watched the mountains change with the seasons. In the autumn, chill winds would come. In the winter, everything was white snow, long icicles hanging from the roof like daggers, which we loved to snap off. We raced around, building snowmen and snow bears and trying to catch snowflakes. Spring was when Swat was at its greenest. Eucalyptus blossoms blew into the house, coating everything white, and the wind carried the pungent smell of rice fields. I was born in summer, which was perhaps why it was my favorite time of the year, even though In Mingora, summer was hot and dry, and the streams drank where people dumped their garbage.